Hello, everybody. Welcome to the next Retrotec webinar. Glad to have you. Really glad to have you. It's always a pleasure. Wanted to get you started. This is with the wanted to get you started on the best practices month. So it's nice to see everybody here and talking about training your staff. So we're going to talk a lot today about training, about adult education principles, these types of things. But we're going to talk a lot, of course, about how Retrotec can deliver solutions for some of your obstacles and some of your needs. So as always, this webinar will be recorded. So please, if you miss anything, if you need to sign off, if you have friends or colleagues that aren't here, then let them know that it's going to be available. It usually takes us a couple of weeks before we get it online, but it'll be online, and we'll be able to provide that to you if you need it at a later time. So best practices month, your presenters today are Jay West and not Joe Medash. Joe is not here, but Joe is in North Carolina, and he's taking care of some mission-critical activity. But we've got Sasha in the background. He's going to be helping me with some of the polls and some of the questions that you may have. But I'll try and do my best to take a break as often as possible, depending on the amount of questions that come in. And we'll talk about, just give me 1 second, and I'll kind of explain to you how to ask those questions. But yes, once again, my name is Jay West. I am an educational consultant. I am a private trainer. But I am contracted to Retrotec, so please don't be confused if I kind of interchangeably use the term they for Retrotec and us for Retrotec. So with no further ado, let me explain how the webinar will work. So some general information. You have a control panel. If you don't want to see the control panel, you can use the red arrow to minimize it, or you can actually go into the view option at the menu on the top of your control menu and just hide the whole thing. Sometimes people just aren't interested, it's in the way, and they don't want to see it. So if that's the case with you, feel free to minimize it. However, if you are interested in interacting, which I highly recommend because this is really helpful for you and for us, I think it really completes the experience, then please feel free to ask a question. Now, you may notice if you've done webinars before, you'll see on our little example here that there's this hand up thing. Well, that's not going to be available on this webinar. We just want to only use the questions. So oftentimes you might not have a question, you might just have a statement, but send it in the question box anyway. But yeah, ask questions, please, as often as possible, whatever you want to talk about. If we don't have time to get to it today, we'll definitely get to it in the future. If you have something that you want to talk to me about specifically, you can always send me your email address and I'll follow up with you. But yeah, make comments, whatever you feel is necessary. We really want couldn't ask you more emphatically to please be involved, and please let us know what you think and what you want to know. At this point, it's always kind of funny. I'm going to explain to you via my voice how to fix it if you can't hear my voice. So in the future, I don't know if you have friends that need help. Let them know the settings. That's where the mic and speaker are. If you click on settings, you're going to see the settings, this sort of menu here, this little window that will help you fix it up and make sure that it might be that the output is, or that the sound is going to a different set of speakers or something. So I'm not using what you would normally think of as learning objectives, but since learning objectives have to be demonstrable, and we aren't going to have any sort of learning assessment at the end of this, we'll just call them session objectives. And this will give you an idea, a framework of what we're going to talk about and what kind of my outline is for today. So I want to talk a little bit about the most effective methods for in-house training. Sure, we are going to reference outside training, but that will be, the idea here is that you're putting together your own training plan, that you are devising methods to enforce and continue education and to make plans for that education for your employees. So that's why we call it in-house training. I'm going to talk a little bit about why training is quality assurance, and quality assurance is training. We're going to talk about how you can build your team's effectiveness, both in the office and with your technicians, whether they be in the field or if they be remote technicians of some sort. We're going to talk about converting technicians into trainers. This is a big deal, and obviously this kind of alludes back to this guy right here, which is the most effective methods for in-house training. And then finally, we're going to talk about converting technicians into a willing sales force, and that obviously I think is a very big deal. So let's move on if everybody's okay. I don't see any questions. So the first thing you need to start with is a business plan. So you might be asking, I thought this was about training. Why are we talking about a business plan? Well, the reason why we're talking about a business plan is that business plan, in order for you to provide training, you have to have a plan for that training. It can't just be ad hoc, I'm sorry to say. That problem being with that is that if it is, then we run out of, we get sideswiped, we get mission creep, we forget some of our points to begin with, I guess. Sorry about that. So it's never too late to have a business plan. Oftentimes people think that a business plan is something that you start a business with, but it doesn't always mean that. It's a living document. Living document means that it's constantly being updated, it's constantly being changed, it's constantly being fixed. And we're going to talk a little bit about that cycle in a second. There are some critical documents that need to be in that sort of a business plan. And those would be specifically what we call a standard operating procedure, or an SOP for short. An SOP, again, doesn't have to take a long time. It doesn't have to, you don't have to spend a lot of time. I know a lot of people are saying, well, I do energy audits, I don't do business plans. But again, if you're going to have a business that's around energy audits, if you're going to make sure that you have time and that you effectively train your people, then you need to have a business plan with a standard operating procedure. That standard operating procedure is basically just like rules and regs, how you do things and what's important to you. Now the steps of service is actually where you get into detail, where you say this is how we do what we do. So for instance, if we're talking about combustion safety testing, in my standard operating procedure, I say that we always perform a combustion safety test on every house. Now the steps of service would say how we perform that combustion safety test. Does it make sense to anybody or everybody? If anybody have any questions about that? Okay, let's move on. That business plan, it needs to be equitable. And equitable just basically means it needs to be fair. Looks like we should be on a slide that says equitable, fair. Looks like my audience view thing isn't working, so I'm just going to assume that it's working all right. If you can't see the slide that says equitable, it says fair, just let me know. Yeah. Sorry about that. Looks like for some reason we had the screen paused. So here we are back at the slide. I think this is the right slide. I apologize again. But your business plan, your steps of service, your standard operating procedures need to be fair. And that's important to training because people need to know that if they're going to take training professionally, they need to know that they are in a professional environment. They need to know that they will be treated impartially. I cannot tell you how many times in my experience I've seen training fall completely flat because people didn't think that it applied to them, that they didn't think the rules applied to them, or they didn't think that they had to do what everybody else had to do because they got some kind of special or partial, they got some kind of special treatment. It needs to be clear. So expectations, these are the most important thing. This expectations and outcomes are really, really, really important, the first step of designing an in-house training. So people need to know what's expected of them. For instance, we have a tech here who's cutting some thermats, and he needs to know that he's expected to cut a certain amount, or that he's needed to apply it in a specific way. If he doesn't know that, how can you train him to do that? How can he understand his training if he doesn't know the outcome of that training? So these things are also really important. Those are often, in fact, should be included in your business plan, in your SOPs, and your steps of service. Let's talk a little bit about this guy. What do I mean when I say, I mentioned earlier that quality assurance equals training equals quality control? Well, it's a cycle. And a well-trained staff they know what's expected of them, like we just mentioned, and that's quality assurance. So your quality assurance plan is your way of saying, this is our process, this is how we do things, this is the way that we want you to do things, right? So that's quality assurance. Well, if you have quality assurance, you can't just say this is how we want to do it. You need to explain to them. You need to train your people. So you need to make sure that they have the skills to meet the expectations that you set. So beyond that, we want to make sure that they also, in that training, that just beyond just having the skills, we want to make sure that we're monitoring them, that we're looking at through the eyes of quality control, that we're making sure that they're adapting to their changing environments and overcoming obstacles. Because yes, you have the skills to do that combustion safety test, but can you do the combustion safety test on a windy day, or if the homeowner doesn't want you to turn their furnace off? And these are just examples, but and then furthermore, that quality control, the way that you look at what you've done, the way that you assess if you've done it right, that also can provide insight for improving expectations. So if you know that your staff is well trained, if you know that they have the skills, and yet your process still isn't working out, now you go back to quality assurance. Now you improve that process, and now you retrain guys on the changes that have been made in that process. Is everybody okay with that? Okay. Feel free to ask any questions. So we're talking about employee development. So we talked about, I mentioned earlier about a well-trained staff. And what that means is that we're actually investing in developing, in training, in making sure that, again, that our people know what's expected of them, and they have the knowledge, skills, and abilities, or knowledge, skills, and attitudes to actually deliver on those expectations. So I want to talk really quickly about what that means. You know, when you're doing in-house training, it's very important to understand, again, that the goal and then the steps of getting there. So it really helps sometimes to kind of break down tasks and not necessarily do a full-blown, what they would call a job task analysis, but sometimes it's really helpful just to understand about the knowledge that people need. So, or I'm sorry, about some of the technical training that they need, and some of those skills that make them, that give them the ability to do what they need to do. So knowledge is one, skills is another, and attitudes is a third. And I want to go through and kind of talk about those in a minute here. But first, I kind of want to talk about some principles of adult learning. Because again, we're talking about adults, and adults are different, and they learn. And this is what we're talking about. When we're talking about training, we're talking about a learning process, and it's very simple. It's very, very simple to be very effective in your training if you just keep it to 3 key adult learning principles. One is you need to demonstrate. So you need to let people know what they're supposed to be doing, and not just giving them a sheet that says what they're supposed to do. Now, now, if that sheet is fantastic, if it's perfect, if it's well written out, if it's very, very effective, that's helpful. But oftentimes, a demonstration means actually face-to-face showing someone what's expected of them, or even just showing them a picture of, hey, this is what a finished attic hatch looks like, or hey, this is the way that a multi-fan with a hard panel, this is the way it's set up. You see that's a picture here. The next thing you got to do is you got to let them practice. And practice doesn't mean answering questions as much. It can be, sometimes it can be, you know, it can be discussing things and asking them to figure things out. But mostly practice means trying to get as much hands-on as possible. Excuse me, as possible. Sometimes that can be a simulated hands-on. So, you know, obviously, you know, like our friends here in this picture, you might not always have an opportunity to actually set up a multi-fan test in a house or in a building. But you might be able to show them a picture of it and ask them some of the critical parts of it, or you might be able to discuss it, maybe even watch a video. And then context. Well, the context is everything needs to be put, and this is so important, that people, again, you know, we talked about, just a minute ago, I talked about people need to know what's expected of them. Well, they need to know that. That's part of what I mean by context. They need to know what's expected of them and why. So they need to know that if you don't, you know, if you don't get the right baseline, then your tests aren't going to be right, and that's going to affect what we do. So when you start talking about training, when you talk about the way adults learn, adults are transformative learners. That means they're going to transform the information that they already have into something that's important to them. So you need to explain to them why it's important to them. You can't just say, hey, this is the way we do things, and expect them to pay attention to it and to internalize it if they don't know why. Make sense, everybody? All right, let's move on. Any questions? All right. So, and the number one thing is always keep in mind that teaching is the best way to learn. Now, we have lots and lots of researches, lots and lots of studies that have been done where they say, how much do people learn from reading? How much do they learn from seeing? How much do they learn from discussing? And then they kind of looked at how much information do people retain from actually teaching that? And they say about 90% of retention for teaching. So ideally, if you really, really want to help, if you really want your employees to develop, if you really want them to understand you want them to learn, ask them to explain it to you. Ask them to show you. Ask them to teach you. Let them know that that you have a system where where you identify your your trainees or your staff who have the knowledge, and that they're going to be asked to pass that knowledge on. This is a very, very effective way of training. Okay, any questions? Okay. So let's talk a little bit here about technical training. Technical training is the training where we are teaching people to actually do specific things. Techniques, it doesn't have to be necessarily high tech, but there are specific sorts of techniques, ways, processes, or even sometimes technology involved. And we need to teach them how to use that, how to interpret it, and how to troubleshoot. So earlier I mentioned that there was knowledge, skills, and attitudes. Now, not to be confusing, in the education world, there are people who call it knowledge, skills, and abilities, but I kind of side with the people that say knowledge, skills, and attitudes, because I think that skills and abilities tend to be a little bit more difficult to figure out the difference between them. I like the idea of attitudes because, listen, I know that you know this. So many of your managers and owners, you realize that that you can, that attitude is by far the most important thing. A smart guy with a bad attitude doesn't get a better attitude most of the time. I shouldn't be so cynical, but a guy with a good attitude who isn't as smart as some of the other guys can make up for it with hard work. So knowledge, let's get back on track. So knowledge of basic facts lists. Oftentimes we talk about, the building science principles. These are perfect examples. If you, back to your training, to your SOPs, to your steps of service, oftentimes knowledge of those steps of service is a really good example of a knowledge-based piece of information. Oftentimes they can be learned through self-study. In fact, knowledge is often, and this is my recommendation, my opinion from my experience, but it's best, especially if you're doing in-house training, especially if you're talking about cost-effective training, that if you can figure out what specific types of pieces of knowledge are needed to do the job, that to fulfill the expectations that you have for your employees, the best way to deliver these is through self-study. Now, self-study scares a lot of people, especially when you're talking about guys that have, that have contracting crews, that have employees that aren't, necessarily academics. In fact, many of them, left the school of academia, left academia because they didn't like it, or they don't want to do it. So please don't think I'm talking about sitting down and reading a book. However, if that is useful for the people for some of the people, so especially some of you, some people who are architects or designers who have employees who love to read and and love to kind of get into a book and are really into academics. That's a great way. But with today's technology, these are really the sort of the three suggested forms of gaining knowledge, and this is online learning. So what you'll see on the picture on the right is a screenshot from one of Retrotec's modules for our blower door testing training. So we have our own certification. We deliver it. That is available to anybody, and we do several different certifications. Blower door, duct testing. We do several other ones. But you check out, if you go to our website, you'll find them, and you can sign up for them whenever you like, or sign up your people for them. But this is one of the best, and I think probably the best, and not just because we provide it, but I think the best way of self-study, because technology allows them to go at their own pace. It allows them to be both visual and auditory. Our training is set up so that they have to interact, so that they have to create things, or they have to do things. So if you're taking our blower door testing training certification, you're going to be asked to actually go and set up a blower door. And then you'll be quizzed about it. So online learning is one of the best. Video playlists. So this is very simple. You know, if you have guys that are, you know, especially guys that are coming in raw that have no exposure to home performance or don't have exposure to some of the things that you do, video playlists are great. So you can go on YouTube, you can pick out several videos, or you can find other video playlists. You can put them together in a playlist and just ask guys to watch those playlists, to watch all those videos put together. This is, bar none, one of the cheapest and easiest way for learners to actually do or perform self-study. Any questions about that? All right, and then there's games. You know, and those games can be online games. There are plenty of providers for online games, interactive games. You know, you can take a look at those, look into those, and pick one that kind of suits your needs. So let's talk a little bit more about knowledge. So it's not just about starting out. It's not just about delivering that knowledge or that training, that knowledge type of training in the beginning. There needs to be the main key to success with this, or one of the main keys to success, is making sure that there's a reference library for these people, so that now that you've learned it, and if you need to go back to it, if you need to reference it, whether it be in the field or in the shop, that it's available to you. Now you see, here's a picture of me working on a tablet. One of the things that I would highly recommend to you, and I think that, you know, regardless of how many people you have in the field, this is a very good investment to have all of your reference materials, whether they would be photos or documents or any of that stuff, to have it online. If you have those online, then people can access those from anywhere. Anybody in the field, anybody, you know, in the office, they can access them from anywhere, and then you can make sure that they're always up to date, that they're always fulfilling the needs that you or the expectations that are always changing as you do your quality control and quality assurance updates and your process improvements. Another great one that's kind of fun. I mean, you know, all these things don't have to be. The more that you make it fun for people, the more interested they are, the more involved, the more engaged they are, the more likely they are to get involved and to actually learn. So, a fun one is what we call the Hall of Fame or Hall of Shame. You know, obviously you always think of Hall of Shame, but Hall of Fame's a great one too. So this is usually just a place, and it could be online if you have tech-savvy guys who like to look online. You could use, you know, a private, you know, group on Facebook or on Google Plus, or you could just do it at the shop or at the office, where you have a wall where you know, some of the weird and crazy stuff that you see, or just pictures of it, or you know, drawings of it or whatever, and then some of the Hall of Fame. I mean, testimonials are so powerful. Not just for your customers, but for your employees. Let your employees know that, hey, this guy does a great job. Put it up there, post it, give them accolades. Make sure that goes out there, that there's and if they've done something particularly great, if they're like, this is exactly the way I want you to do this, take a picture of it, put it up there. Notes in code books are standards. You'll notice, and actually in this picture, I'm actually making notes about on a standard that I thought, that I was curious to see. I didn't understand if that really was applicable to this, so I'm making a note in there, and so that note is going to be available to everybody else. So now you're looking at somebody who's making notes on standards that we didn't write, but we still are sort of interpreting ourselves. So does it make sense to everybody? Any questions? Okay. All right. Let's move on. So another aspect of technical training is going to be skills training. So I think that this is predominantly what people think of when they think about training. They think about classrooms, they think about, you know, skills, especially technical training. They're thinking about specific skills. So the actions or decisions that are based on sets of knowledge. Well, skills are always based on knowledge. I mean, you can't have the skill to, for instance, hammer a nail if you don't know what a hammer is. You know, that's kind of simplistic, but at the same time, that's why we say skills are always based on sets of knowledge. Oftentimes, and unfortunately, in our industry, especially in certain parts of our market, of the home performance market, we have people who we don't give the opportunity, we don't teach enough knowledge to, and expect them to be able to perform skills. I don't know how many times I've said it. How can you install any kind of insulation properly if you don't understand heat transfer? Same with a duct tester. How would you expect a test to be performed properly if they don't understand building science, if they don't understand how a manometer works? So skills are actions or decisions that are based on sets of knowledge. Talk a little bit more about that. These are best learned through activity or interaction. Now again, we oftentimes we think of a classroom, and this picture that we have right here is actually a picture of a classroom, and this is a trainer who's actually using our virtual gauge which is a piece of PC software that again we have plenty of information with of how to use quick guides, manuals, you name it, and even plenty of webinars that you can check out, videos of how to use it. But essentially what these guys are doing here is we have all these people in the classroom that have their own manometer. You have the trainer here sitting at a computer, and she is actually connecting to all of those manometers and then posting them up on screen, and this is sort of the blow up of that screen. So you can imagine if each of these manometers were plugged into different parts of a house, or perhaps if you had a house of pressure, or if you even just wanted to sort of make pressure differences across the tip of a hose or a tap, what you could show them, how they differentiate. So oftentimes the skills are done in a classroom, labs. The difference between a classroom and a lab is a lab has props. A lab, usually a classroom is people sitting, but again here, one might argue that this is a lab because they're holding materials. But other things are like webinars. So take into consideration that you're on a webinar right now, and this is sort of like a virtual classroom. Why? Because it's interactive. Which is why at the beginning I asked, please make sure that you ask questions. Let me know what you're thinking. Let me know what you want to know more about, because this is your opportunity to ask those questions. You're active. It is not self-study. It's active, interactive, and it's a classroom or sort of a skills-based training that we're looking to deliver. Any questions about that? So attitudes. Again, what I feel, and this is my experience, is probably the most important thing. Sure, most of these attitudes derive from motivation, and that's going to be generally, motivation is going to be an internal locus of control. So motivation, and that's especially in the face of obstacles. So we all know that that we've had plenty of employees, plenty of people that we train, trainees, learners, that have been extremely motivated until they ran into something that was difficult and then they sort of gave up. So I guess the question is, why do they give up? Well, maybe it's because they don't feel that it's in their best interest, or that it's in the interest of, or that it will help others who they're interested in helping to overcome those obstacles, to put that extra effort in. So that's why attitude is so important, especially in training, because the idea of training is that we are consistently giving people, we're trying to make them learn, we're trying to make them figure things out. And the way to do that is to challenge them just enough so that they can overcome challenge, so that they can build an attitude, so they can build their confidence, and so that they can build their skills. They're not afraid to use those skills. Oftentimes we have people who have the skills, who have the abilities, but have the knowledge, but are simply not motivated to use them. So these are almost always best learned on the job. The idea here is that if you really want to talk about how somebody really feels, how they really think, well, how they're really motivated, it's very often more important that they be, and we talked earlier about context. Well, the context where this is applied, where they're faced with obstacles, where they're asked to actually show their true motivation, that's going to be in the field almost all the time. So I guess it holds that these attitudes are usually best learned on the job. So some of the places that they learn these are from crew leaders or supervisors. Attitudes, obviously, if you have people who that they look up to, or supervisors or trainers that just aren't motivated themselves, that don't care they're going to pick up on that and they're going to model that. So these behaviors, so it's very important that we have people out there that we have crew leaders, supervisors, people that we treat as trainers. We'll talk a little bit about that in a second, as leaders, and that they're motivated and that they understand how to train and that they understand the importance of their attitudes. Best practices. So hey, it's best practices month. Got to bring it up. What are best practices? I know I didn't even talk about this, Sasha. Where are you, man? You got to help me out with these. Best practices are basically just sort of better ways of doing things that are opinion, but they're based on opinion of experienced people who have tried these things many, many times over. So this, I think, always speaks volumes to the guy in the field. It's more than just saying, hey, you got to do step 1, 2, 3, 4. It's like saying, hey, just so you know, if you're going to tighten this nut, you might want to actually use a nut driver. Or sorry, instead of using a screw, why don't you use a nut driver? Because if you slip in the cold, you'll stab yourself in the hand with a screwdriver, and you won't do it with a nut driver. Those little things like that make people say, hey, wait a second, this guy knows what he's talking about. I'm motivated to listen to him. I'm motivated to follow him because I think that he knows what he's talking about. So that's important. And then dedication to team or coworkers. And a lot of this goes back to our idea of having an equitable standard operating procedure, to having a business plan that is based on making sure that we are impartial, professional, and that people are treated the same, and that people know that there are that if they do something right, that they will be benefited. Excuse me, and if they do something wrong, that they will not be benefited. So that's my most politically correct way of saying that. But that's the most important thing, because a lot of times people are motivated by their dedication to the team or coworkers. They're very dedicated to the way people see each other. Even people outside in their personal lives. Obviously, we know this, but if we talk about PG&E did a fantastic study a few years ago where they asked people, what would motivate them to do a home energy upgrade, and they asked them, and this is of course I'm just kind of not quoting this specifically, it's not verbatim, but basically they asked them, well, what if you knew that it would save you money on energy? What if they knew that it would make your home more comfortable? What if they knew that if you knew that it would make your home more durable? What if you knew that your next door neighbors already did it? So you know what I'm getting at. A large group of them, the majority of them, answered that they would be more motivated to get a home energy improvement if their neighbors were getting it. And that just goes back to the fact that attitudes are driven by the way we see other people and the way we think people see us. So a team-based sort of atmosphere, an organizational culture is so important for this. And training is part of that. I'm going to move on. So let's talk about me. That's actually is a picture of me right now talking to you. So, but the idea here is that this is sort of a simulated person working in the office, and I'll get back to that in a second. But let's talk about meetings. Now, if you're working in the field, if you're doing on-site, if you're working on-site, you're probably having regular meetings. In fact, morning meetings where you're talking about what you're doing. But sometimes people have meetings in the office. They need to be positive. There is nothing that crushes people's attitudes that completely debunks training. So you spent all this time and money trying to motivate people to learn and do the right things, because of course the reason why you train them is because you want them to be able to fulfill your expectations. But then what happens is their attitudes are crushed when you have meetings, and all the meetings are about are who did what wrong and why they didn't do it right. Meetings need to be positive. The negative stuff, in fact, I would say almost entirely positive. If there are negative things, those probably should be done one-on-one. They need to be regular. They need to be. You need to have one, like I said. If it's not daily, to have your short sort of. Oftentimes people like myself who have worked on job sites who have their safety tailgate meeting in the morning. Or you need to have, your office, your regular Monday morning meeting, or even if you're an in-house technician, you might even have your priority meetings on a sort of biweekly basis. But they need to be on site. So back to what we were talking about, attitudes being on-the-job training. They need to be on site. They need to, your meetings need to be wherever you do your work. It's best that that meeting take place there, because we can talk about, we can make sure that we understand that our attitudes and what we're talking about are applicable to what we do. I hope that makes sense. I'm not getting any questions, so I get the feeling that everybody knows exactly what I'm talking about, which is awesome. But if you have any questions, please feel free to send them. So training opportunities. So let's talk about training opportunities. The best training opportunity in the world is a mistake. Absolutely, positively. And this goes back to what we talked about, crew leaders, managers, supervisors. Those people need to be trained. They need to understand that when somebody that works for you makes a mistake, this is a golden opportunity for learning, for training. It is not a golden opportunity to yell at someone, to embarrass someone. That's not how we train. That's not how people learn. People learn when you say, hey, and you want to talk about attitude, what better way to make a person invested than when they make a mistake and they feel ashamed, when you come over and say, you know what, that's okay. People make mistakes. This is how you do it right. They will definitely learn better than almost any possibility. So any other type of training technique. Rainy days, hey, if if what you do, if your testing is done outside, or if it's because it's, I should say, for many of us who do pressure tests, maybe they should say windy day. But if it's a windy day or a rainy day, or if there's any kind of environmental factors that for some reason have preempted you from actually doing your work that day, this is a great training opportunity. This is the day where you can get people, inside who, where you're fixing the hoses, or you're calibrating your gauges, or you're making sure that that everybody's got all of their equipment together. So that's a really great, rainy days, windy days are great days for great training opportunities. And then employee installation. Hey, this is a fantastic idea, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about this, but let's take into consideration, sometimes we're doing different types of tests. Sometimes we're installing different types of, whether it be exhaust fans or it be ERVs or any of these things. For most mid to larger size businesses, they're going to need to try to install that. And I cannot tell you how many times I've seen people say, okay, well, we're going to build this sort of this test structure in our office or in our warehouse, and we're going to practice installing this before we go install it in a person's real house. And they spend a lot of time and money trying to simulate the real experience. What about installing it in one of your employees' houses? What about giving them the opportunity to really, obviously, you want to talk about an attitude. What kind of attitude will they have if they're installing a piece of equipment into their own house? Obviously, they're going to be very serious about it. They're going to take it seriously. They're going to want to learn, and they're going to be very happy that that you install that in there. So, that could be part of a compensation package or otherwise. So, all right, let's move on to the next one. Any questions? So, the big thing, of course, with on-the-job training is that what you're saying is that you got to be on the site. You need to have a trainer on site. So this is one of the solutions that we provide via our DM32 or Wi-Fi gauge. So via this DM32, this Wi-Fi gauge, you can actually set up a screen share. So what we kind of have here is this is our technician right here who's in the house, and he is connected via Wi-Fi to his DM32, and that's running the blower door. And now this is sort of a blow-up of his computer, and he is connecting via the internet via a screen share to his boss, who is in Tahiti, kicking it. But the point is that now this boss from anywhere can provide training, can provide reinforcement, can help him say, hey, that there's a reason why you're only getting 4.2 ACH at 50 in this house, and help them troubleshoot. So these things these are some of the solutions that we can actually provide via a Wi-Fi gauge with Retrotec. And again, it reinforces this training idea that attitudes are best taught on site. Any questions? All right. So we talked about technical training. Just a word about operational training. Oh, I just broke something. Just a word about operational training. This is very, very important, and this often gets gets forgotten. When we start talking about, home performance and some of the technical trades that we're involved in, is that people forget that your employees need to understand what procedures they're expected to use, what codes they're expected to follow, and not just external codes. I mean, I'm not just talking about the IECC. I'm talking about dress codes. They're expected to wear a certain thing or look a certain way. And then environmental factors. How do they deal with environmental factors? How do they deal with a service call where the homeowner has already had them out there, and we have specific processes or specific protocols for dealing with with client complaints, those type of things. So it's very, very important that people are trained on those things, and it's part of their development. And I'll get to the next slide here, which explains a little bit about techs and trainers. So training equals leadership, and I mentioned that earlier when I said looked like so many of you or at least was my guess. I couldn't see specifically the statistics, but I had a feeling that most of you who reported that you were an owner or a manager were also reporting as a trainer. That's because training is leadership. I mean, if you think about it, to stand up in front of a group or even a person and say, this is how you're supposed to do something, well, what you're doing is exhibiting leadership in its most fundamental format. So the techs, when we're talking about developing our staff, and we're talking about developing people, developing their knowledge, skills, and abilities, and delivering them, giving them the confidence to know that they can do things, and helping them have an attitude that's a teamwork type of attitude, what you're really developing is a leader. And those leaders are ready to train. That's part of being a leader is training, teaching, letting other people know, what's best for the group and how to get to it. So this is an organizational organizational culture that you've just developed, one person at a time, or you develop this idea that learning is important, that the quality of the work that we deliver is important, and that we're a team. So that's part of, I guess it's almost sort of a trick, and when we talked about the learning objectives, that we would sort of break that one out extra, because in fact that's part of the heart and soul of what we're doing here. Is we just developed a leader, and that leader is a trainer. Questions or insights about that? Let's see here. All right, so let's move on to the next one. And let's talk, whoops, sorry about that. Let's talk about techs in the sales force. Talk about the idea that we're developing our techs into a willing sales force. Well, it's pretty simple. We just delivered education, and we educated them, and they've been educated, and they understand what they're doing, they understand why they're doing it, they understand how it helps, they understand what happens if you don't do it right. Well, these are all things that they need to explain to the client. They need to explain to the client what the client's needs are, and they need to understand the products and services that you deliver that helps fix those needs, that helps them overcome those, to deliver solutions for those clients. So this is very, very, very important. So, again, in fact, it's again sort of another sort of a strategy here, or sort of a tricky way of going about it. But the fact is that everything that we've talked about develops these people, these techs that are in your clients' homes, that are at your clients' offices, or that are meeting with your clients on site, or meeting them in their offices. Essentially, that you're helping them understand what they do and how they do it, so that they can explain to the client why they need it, so they can identify that the client needs it, and so that they can understand your products and services and protocols and processes that deliver those things, that help with those things. And that's, again, so important, because there's no better salesperson than the salesperson that isn't a salesperson. The salesperson that is an educator, that is an advocate, and that is a source of knowledge and a reference source. So, any questions about that? Okay. Well, before we get into, and I'm sorry that we're running out of time today, but I want to talk a little bit about what we have upcoming. Let's talk about training. Let's talk about some of the opportunities for you and for your staff, and for to train. And some of these are webinars, and some of these are events. So, today we have, of course, the webinar today, best practices, and this is the best practices month. I think, in my mind, this is one of the best months for our training, for delivering training, because we're talking about, again, best practices, which are, our opinion of some and the opinion of others who have done these things, of how to do things a little bit better. Right now, from tomorrow until the 7th in North Carolina, the Building Performance Conference is going on, and Joe Medosh will be out there. Stop by if you're around. Let him know that that you're on the webinar, and let him at least just please tell him you had a good time. Seriously though, he'll be there. We have next week. We have no, not next week, but next week we do have one webinar. All of our webinars start at 11 Pacific Standard Time, noon Mountain Time, at 1 Midwest or Standard Time, and then at 2 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. So the next one is Tuesday, best practices for blower door tests and IR cameras. This is a very, very interesting one, especially considering that so many of you have invested so much money in those tools, and blower doors and IR cameras. It's really important that people know how to use those tools. Thursday, and that's what I meant to mention, is that Thursday we have another one. So next week we actually have two. We have so many best practices, we've got to do 2 webinars next week. So we'll also be doing on Thursday, best practices for duct testing, and that one is a very powerful one. I definitely recommend, if you're doing any duct testing or if you have any people that your staff are doing it, please sign them up for this. It's a great free internal training for a way to help them learn to do just do their job a little bit better. November 19th in Pasadena, California, IHACI, the 35th Annual Trade Show. Joe will be there again. This one looks to be a very interesting opportunity, like sort of an up-and-coming 35th Annual Trade Show that I think is just now really starting to gain some heavy momentum. So if you're out in California, if you're in Pasadena, I really highly recommend it. It's only one day. And then Tuesday, November 18th, we'll be back with our best practices, highly repeatable tests, and troubleshooting test problems, which is also a really kind of a fun one to attend. Any questions about that? Well, the coup de grace. This is, if you haven't heard, I will go back to it. Slide. This is I'm really proud, I'm really happy to tell you about this. Next February. So the 4th and the 5th of February, directly following the ACI Northwest conference, there will be Monday and Tuesday. Directly following that, in the same hotel, the Sheraton Seattle Hotel, we will be delivering our second Seattle, this multi-fan blower door training. I can tell you that we have put a lot of work into it right now. There will be a lot more work into it. Put into it. It was extremely successful the last time we did it, and this is the registration page. So check out retrotec.com, www.retrotec.com, to sign up for it. I know it sounds funny, but we do have a limited amount of spaces. We can only have so many people in the room and deliver effective training. So we've kind of limited the amount of people that we're going to accept. We do have a lot of interest in it. Obviously, the registration fee is nominal, so really get in there and sign up for that. And I really look forward to seeing you there. Thanks so much for attending. Thanks so much for sharing. If you have any additional questions, please send them. Keep an eye out for the next week or two for the repost of this online. Look forward to kind of especially delivering some of those additional trainings or trainings on some of the stuff that you talked about additionally. And if you have any questions, send me an email. You can also send me an email at jwest@retrotec.com. I'd be really happy to talk to you. Thank you so much.